and after these numerous falconers, huntsmen, breakers, foresters, and yeomen, with staghounds in leash, and hawk on fist, all ready for the sport. Fancy all this, if you can, Dick, and then conceive what a brave sight it must have been. Well, as I said, we came up in the very nick of time, for presently the royal coach stopped, and Sir Richard Hoghton, calling all his gentlemen around him, and bidding us dismount, we followed him, and drew up bareheaded before the king, while Sir Richard pointed out to his Majesty the boundaries of the royal forest, and told him he would find it as well stocked with deer as any in his kingdom. Before putting an end to the conference, the king complimented the worthy knight on the gallant appearance of his train, and on learning we were all gentlemen, graciously signified his pleasure that some of us should be presented to him. Among others, I was brought forward by Sir Richard, and liking my looks, I suppose, the king was condescending enough to enter into conversation with me, and as his discourse chiefly turned on sporting matters, I was at home with him at once, and he presently grew so familiar with me that I almost forgot the presence in which I stood. However, his Majesty seemed in no way offended by my freedom, but on the contrary clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Maister Assheton, for a country gentleman, you're weel mannered and weel informed, and I shall be glad to see more of you when I stay in these parts." After this, the good natured monarch mounted his horse, and the hunting began, and a famous day's work we made of it, his Majesty killing no fewer than 5 fine bucks with his own hand. "Oh, you are clearly on the road to preferment, Nicholas," observed Richard, with a smile. "You will outstrip Buckingham himself if you go on in this way." "So I tell him," observed Sherborne, laughing; "and by my faith, young Sir Gilbert Hoghton, who, owing to his connection by marriage with Buckingham, is a greater man than his father, Sir Richard, looked quite jealous; for the king more than once called out to Nicholas in the chase, and took the wood knife from him when he broke up the last deer, which is accounted a mark of special favour." "Well, gentlemen," said the squire, "I shall not stand in my own light, depend upon it. If I should bask in court sunshine, you shall partake of the rays. If I do become master of the household in lieu of the Duke of Richmond, or master of the horse and cupbearer to his Majesty in place of his Grace of Buckingham, I will not forget you." "Oh, we are greatly indebted to you, my Lord Marquis of Downham, and Duke of Pendle Hill that is to be," rejoined Sherborne, taking off his cap with mock reverence; "and perhaps, for the sake of your sweet sister and my spouse Dorothy, you will make interest to have me appointed gentleman of the bedchamber." "Oh, doubt it not, doubt it not," replied Nicholas, in a patronising tone. "My ambition soars higher than yours, Sherborne," said Richard. "I must be Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal or nothing." "Oh, what you will, gentlemen, what you will," cried Nicholas. "You can ask me nothing I will not grant, always providing I have the means."
A turn in the road now showed them Hoghton Tower, crowning the summit of an isolated and conical hill, about 2 miles off. Rising proudly in the midst of a fair and fertile plain, watered by the Ribble and the Darwen, this stately edifice seemed to command the whole country. And so King James thought, as, from the window of his chamber, he looked down upon the magnificent prospect around him, comprehending, on the one hand, the vast forests of Myerscough and Bowland, stretching as far as the fells near Lancaster, and on the other, an open but still undulating country, beautifully diversified with wood and water, well peopled and well cultivated, green with luxuriant pastures, yellow with golden grain, or embowered with orchards, boasting many villages and small towns, as well as 2 lovely rivers, which, combining their currents at Walton le Dale, gradually expanded till they neared the sea, which could be seen gleaming through openings in the distant hills. As the king surveyed this fair scene, and thought how strong was the position of the mansion, situated as it was upon the high cliffs springing abruptly from the Darwen, and how favourably circumstanced, with its forest and park, for the enjoyment of the chase, of which he was passionately fond, how capable of defence, and how well adapted for a hunting seat, he sighed to think it did not belong to the crown. Nor was he wrong in his estimate of its strength, for in after years, during the civil wars, it held out stoutly against the parliamentary forces, and was only reduced at last by treachery, when part of its gate tower was blown up, destroying an officer and 200 men, in that blast most woefully. Though the hour was so early, the road was already thronged, not only with horsemen and pedestrians of every degree from Preston, but with rude lumbering vehicles from the neighbouring villages of Plessington, Brockholes, and Curden, driven by farmers who, with their buxom dames and cherry cheeked daughters, decked out in holiday finery, hoped to gain admittance to Hoghton Tower, or at all events to obtain a peep of the King as he rode to the hunt. Most of these were saluted by Nicholas, who scrupled not to promise them admission to the outer court of the Tower, and even went so far as to offer some of the comelier damsels a presentation to the King. Occasionally the road was enlivened by strains of music from a band of minstrels, by a song or a chorus from others, or by the gamesome tricks of a party of mummers. At one place a couple of tumblers and a clown were performing their feats on a cloth stretched on the grass beneath a tree. Here the crowd collected for a few minutes, but presently gave way to loud shouts, attended by the cracking of whips, proceeding from the two grooms in the yellow and white livery of Sir Richard Hoghton, who headed some half dozen carts filled with provisions, carcasses of sheep and oxen, turkeys and geese, pullets and capons, fish, bread, and vegetables, all bent for Hoghton Tower. For though Sir Richard had made vast preparations for his guests, he found his supplies, great as they were, wholly inadequate to their wants. Cracking their whips in answer to the shouts with which they were greeted, the purveyors galloped on, many a hungry wight looking wistfully after them. Nicholas and his companions were now at the entrance to Hoghton Park, through which the Darwen coursed, after washing the base of the rocky heights on which the mansion was situated. Here 4 yeomen of the guard, armed with halberds, and an officer were stationed, and no one was admitted without an order from Sir Richard Hoghton. Possessing a pass, the squire and his companions, with their attendants, were of course allowed to enter, but the throng accompanying them were sent over the bridge and along a devious road skirting the park, which, though it went more than a mile round, eventually brought them to their destination. Hoghton Park, though not very extensive, boasted a great deal of magnificent timber, and in some places was so thickly wooded that, according to Dr. Curden, could scarcely have seen the sunshine at middle of day. Into one of these tenebrous groves the horsemen now plunged, and for some moments were buried in the gloom produced by matted and overhanging boughs. Issuing once more into the warm sunshine, they traversed a long and beautiful sylvan glade, skirted by ancient oaks, with mighty arms and gnarled limbs, the patriarchs of the forest. In the open ground on the left were scattered a few ash trees, and beneath them browsed a herd of fallow deer, while crossing the lower end of the glade was a large herd of red deer, for which the park was famous, the hinds tripping nimbly and timidly away, but the lordly stags, with their branching antlers, standing for a moment at gaze, and disdainfully regarding the intruders on their domain. Little did they think how soon and how severely their courage would be tried, or how soon the mort would be sounded for their prize by the huntsman. But if, happily for themselves, the poor leathern coated fools could not foresee their doom, it was not equally hidden from Nicholas, who predicted what would ensue, and pointed out one noble hart which he thought worthy to die by the king's own hand. As if he understood this, the stately beast tossed his antlered head aloft, and plunged into the adjoining thicket, but the squire noted the spot where he had disappeared. The glade led them into the chase, a glorious hunting ground of about 2 miles in circumference, surrounded by an amphitheatre of wood, and studded by noble forest trees. Variety and beauty were lent to it by an occasional knoll crowned with timber, or by numerous ferny dells and dingles. As the horsemen entered upon the chase, they observed at a short distance from them a herd of the beautiful but fierce wild cattle, originally from Bowland Forest, and still preserved in the park. White and spangled in colour, with short sharp horns, fine eyes, and small shapely limbs, these animals were of untameable fierceness, possessed of great cunning, and ever ready to assault any one who approached them. They would often attack a solitary individual, gore him, and trample him to death.